10 is Anne Frank's attic. For those of you who don't know, Anne Frank was a German-born Jewish girl who kept a diary in which she documented life in hiding from 1942 to 1944 during the German occupation of the Netherlands in World War II. She wrote every day in her diary about her life from her family's hiding place in an Amsterdam attic. Her diary was eventually published, and it's now one of the world's best known books. Now, this photo is not of Anne, but of her father, Otto, in 1960, revisiting the attic where the family hid. He was the sole survivor of his family, so I can't imagine the pain he had revisiting this place. Later, the photographer Arnold Newman recalled taking this photo. He said, "The mood was depressing and I immediately began photographing him. After a few moments, the Westertoren bells next door began to ring. Those were the bells that Anne wrote about. He suddenly broke down completely, weeping uncontrollably, and then so did I. We never met again. To this day, when I lecture or tell his story to people, I find I choke up. I still can't help myself." Number 9. An inmate at the Rab camp. The Rab camp was one of several Italian concentration camps, and it was established during World War II in July 1942 on the Italian-occupied island of Rab, now in Croatia. Estimates of the Commission for Determining the Crimes of the Occupiers say 4,641 detainees died at the camp, including 800 inmates who died while being transported from Rab to other concentration camps in Italy. In July 1943, after the fall of the fascist regime in Italy, the camp was closed, but some of the remaining Jewish prisoners were deported by German forces to the extermination camps. Under Italian Army Commander Mario Rotatta's watch, the ethnic cleansing and violence committed against the Slovene civilian population included summary executions, hostage-taking and ending the hostages' lives, reprisals, and the burning of houses and villages. Slovenes and Croatians suffered from cold and hunger in open-air tents, surrounded by barbed wire fence and guarded towers. At its peak, there were up to 15,000 internees. Conditions at the camp were described as appalling, filthy, muddy, overcrowded, and swarming with insects. This photo just shows how much suffering they went through. Number 8. A jail cell from the Salem witch trials. This makeshift jail cell truly brings out the horrors of the Salem witch trials. These trials were a series of hearings and prosecutions of people accused of witchcraft in colonial Massachusetts between February 1692 and May 1693. More than 200 people were accused, 30 people were found guilty, 19 of whom were executed by hanging. Now, women vastly outnumbered men in the ranks of accused and executed. It was in cells like this one that the accused witches spent their final moments before being executed. Now, it's just sad because we all know that this was just a scare and that they weren't real witches. Many of these women were suspected and chosen because they were simply unliked. Number 7. Pyramids on the moon. In 1972, this image was taken by Apollo 17 during its flight to the moon near an area known as Geophone Rock. NASA listed the image as blank, but after retouching the photo, you can see that it's not completely blank. Turning up the contrast, a pyramidal structure can be seen. So, what is it? Was it some malfunction of the camera, or is there actually a pyramid on the moon? NASA has never given a credible version of the issue, which has led to some speculations about what actually can be on the moon, hidden from the public. And listen, not to be a crazy conspiracy theorist, but maybe it is true that aliens built the pyramids on Earth as they look like they did it on the moon too. I don't know, but it gives you a lot to think about.
Number 6. Spaceman. Look, we've all been photobombed before. It's a blessing in disguise, right? You look back at prom photos, some guy sneezing in the background making a mess, it's the best. But when Jim Templeton took a photo of his daughter in an empty marsh long before Photoshop existed, might I add, it appears an astronaut photobombed the family moment. Yeah, Jim assures us that nobody was around, which I personally believe. Otherwise, what a weird photo to take in an otherwise empty field. I'd be like, hi, I don't want to be in this photo. It's weird, right? It makes it more believable. Kodak even got involved in the story, like the company Kodak. They confirmed this photo was not tampered with. Yeah, we're just gonna run everything by Kodak from now on. They were so confident when this happened. Spider-Man leak, Kodak's like, that's Andrew Garfield. That's authentic, that's a real one. Number 5, the Worstead Church. Okay, time to get a little paranormal. We love those. Back in 1975, Peter and Diane Berthelot were visiting the Worstead Church in the UK. So like any other visitor does, Peter took a photo of his lovely wife sitting in this spectacle of a church. But later on, once said photo was developed, somebody else was in the photo. Another photobomb. Or something. There appears to be a person dressed in all white sitting behind Diane, some sort of figure. How calming is that? Just maybe behind you at all times, who knows? When the couple went back to the same church to ask about who it was or what it was, a local suggested that they may have gotten photo proof of the white lady, the spirit of a healer who haunts the church. I mean, as far as surprise ghosts go, that's a pretty tame encounter. That's how it should be, if anything. That's how I hope it goes. God forbid I ever encounter a spirit. Is there one behind me right now? I don't want to look. Number 4, the Black Knight satellite. Not to be confused with Martin Lawrence's The Black Knight, that's a pretty historical and memorable movie in itself. The Black Knight satellite is something that has been orbiting our planet for thousands of years. Everything else in this list is quite recent, all things considered. This myth is an ancient one. This photo here you've probably seen at one point or another. It was taken back in 1998 during an American mission to the International Space Station. Apparently this guy has been hovering over Earth, just watching, just observing us. Some sort of alien satellite. That's the theory here. That's a fun theory, no doubt about it, but during a spacewalk in 1998, one of the thermal covers came loose and drifted away from the station. Could this just be that cover? It just looks sinister because it's in space and the photo just looks grainy. I don't know. These photos were originally shared by NASA and it looks a lot different than a solar sail, in my humble opinion. I'm voting alien satellite. I'm gonna lean into that one. I've been watching that one for a few years. I'm into it. Apparently the Illuminati shot it down back in 2015, but I don't know. That's just the internet being the internet. I was gonna throw that in, but I was like, not enough info on it. So it's definitely a floating alien satellite. Number 3, nursing home spirit. This photo was taken from a nursing home resident the same night another resident had sadly passed away. Good time to take photos and have memories, I guess. This was back in 2015. That night they heard a door open and close a few times, but there were no visitors allowed. So obviously something was afoot. So there's a great amount of people who think that this image here is one of two things. The spirit of said resident that had passed away, or the Grim Reaper. That's scary. If it's one of them, I hope it's the first. The door opening and closing, people think that was the Grim Reaper coming in and doing his Grim Reaper thing and then leaving. That's so scary. I mean, a few comments are saying how it's comforting to know that in the end of your life, you aren't alone and that somebody greets you and, escorts you to the afterlife. I'd rather die alone than have this dude break into my house, to be honest with you, but that's just my opinion. Either way, possible photo of a ghost or the Grim Reaper. How fun is that? Hit the thumbs up for the Grim Reaper. Let's hope we don't see him anytime soon, except for on this list. Number 2, Norway Lights. Natural light phenomena is common on our big beautiful planet. The northern lights, for example, the green flash, we've mentioned that before on this channel. Solar eclipses, I bet those were alarming back in ancient times. Just gets dark for a minute and they're like, what happened? Hello? On, please. Some of these natural events look otherworldly, they look cosmic. Most of the time there's an explanation awaiting, but for the mysterious glowing orbs floating over Norway, the Hesdalen lights, as locals refer to them, well, we still need answers for those. Scientists have been trying to gather research for a while now, and in 2014, after many impressive light shows, their best guess so far is that it's a natural battery that charges underground. Yep, whatever that means. Whatever the hell that means. Maybe this has something to do with the reoccurring lights over Phoenix, Arizona. Maybe it's just aliens just bopping about, just doing their alien bopping thing, their usual bopping spots. And finally, number 1, time traveler. Do you believe in time travel? If your answer is no, maybe this last one will change your mind. Hopefully. I'm from the future. It does. And you also hit that thumbs up. I've seen it. And there's many futures. It's a common theme in movies. Back to the Future, Looper, Avengers Endgame. Time travel plots are fun, but they're absolute nonsense. But when we see a case like the Cape Scott story, we can't help but be intrigued just a little bit, right? Could it be? Possibly? Rhyming a little bit? Could it be possibly? Time travel or not, this is an interesting photo. It sticks out. It comes from Ray Peterson's book, The Great Cape Scott Story, and that book was from 1974, but this actual photo was taken over 100 years ago. And there's a modern looking guy in this photo. He looks like he was from yesterday. Rocking shorts, messy morning surfer hair, the thing I'm trying to do apparently in this video. Is that me? Is this my cousin? That's crazy. A photograph from the 40s seems to feature a modern man. Time travel confirmed. That's how we're ending this list. Boom. You're from the future. You saw this coming, right? Kicking off our list at number 10, the reindeer gift. We'll turn the clocks back to 1941 right off the hop. When the Germans were attacking the Soviet Union, it was of course one of the biggest attacks in history. Britain and the United States had to send over weapons, supplies, anything really, just to keep them afloat, just to keep them in the fight. Now they sent these supplies through the Arctic Circle, that was the only route, but of course it was littered with U-boats, you know, war stuff. So thankfully the British HMS Trident was there to watch the waters, and in turn the Soviets were able to fight on. As a gift, as a thank you rather, the Soviets sent the captain of the Trident, they sent him a live reindeer that the British of course had to accept because it was ill-mannered if you don't. So they had to keep a 6-foot tall, real-life living reindeer on a submarine. Must be comfortable, awesome. Imagine the smell. Her name was Pollyanna and they brought her on board through a torpedo tube. She was tiny, she's the cutest little thing. She was a crew member for 6 weeks, which is honestly hilarious because you know some of those guys got way too attached, you know for sure. She slept better than most, if I'm being honest. She shared her room in the captain's quarters. Again, imagine the smell. I don't know, is it worth it? I've always wanted a baby goat growing up, so this is kind of the closest thing. I'm jealous, I'm weirdly jealous. Number 9, Stalin Photoshop. Deepfakes are getting out of hand. I have no idea what's real or what's fake anymore. To be honest, I'm not even Taylor. I'm actually Olivia doing a list right now, but it's been deepfaked so well that you believe it. Modern technology is really making it hard to tell what's real and what's not, but it goes back. Back in 1939, a photo of Stalin was published, and he looks normal. He actually looks kind of great. Some would say he looks way too good. You know what I mean? He was touching up photos as far back as 1939, just airbrushing, just digitally removing all those zits and stuff. Like really? That far back? But even if you got a photo with Stalin, there's a chance that you yourself would be digitally removed. Like Nikolai Yevtsov, for example, the leader of the NKVD. He was in a photo with Stalin, but around 1937, Nikolai was responsible for orders that had over 1 million people arrested, so it wasn't ideal to be in a photo with Nikolai at the time. So he was denounced, imprisoned, and he died in 1940. So Stalin had him digitally erased and replaced in a photo. That's pretty hilarious. I don't know, this man was ahead of his time via Photoshop. How did he do it? How did they do it? No one knows. Number 8, Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. Nice, I remember this one. I heard about this on LimeWire. That was cool. Heard about that at full volume. This was a huge presidential scandal. Back when you know, didn't happen every other week and stuff, this was a big deal. It was 1998 and Clinton's White House intern Monica Lewinsky was 22 years old at the time. Yeah, young. When you think back to all this old history, you're like, oh, they were this. No, very young, extremely young. They had a from 1995 to 1997, despite what LimeWire told us. Lewinsky said she hooked up with Bill 9 different times at the White House, and apparently, according to her schedule, Hillary Clinton was at the White House for at least 7 of those times. She's like, what's going on in there, huh? Is that my... Who is that? Number 7, adhesive bras. We'll liven this up a little bit with some vintage history it's kind of funny. It's pretty funny. Let's talk about sticky bras, shall we? What a mess this was, oh my. Back in 1949, Life magazine released an article that caught everybody's attention, obviously. This was news, this was like a new technology that was being announced. It was May 16th, 1949, and the article read, for 5,000 years, clothes have been draped, tied, buttoned, pinned, and buckled on the human form. This year, for the first time in history, drumroll, they will be glued on. What in the world? How? This is witchcraft. How did that happen? Just 1, 2, that's it? That's easy. Inventor Charles Langs changed the game, or he thought he did, in 1949. He made these bra cups that would stick to you with adhesive. This, you know, special glue. This special glue. This specific adhesive was promised to leave behind no residue, it was supposed to be painless, yet at the same time, stay glued on even if you were to jump into a pool from a 10-foot diving board. That was the sell. Yeah, well, that's not true. That's definitely not true. Well, Langs ended up selling the company to Textron later on, and the product ultimately failed.
While this eye looks like it may belong to a scary monster, it's actually a human eye. While rummaging through photographs that captured the devastating impact of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki, this photo emerged. On the 6th and 9th of August 1945, the United States detonated 2 atomic for the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, respectively. The aerial bombings together ended the lives between 129,000 and 226,000 people. People, most of whom were civilians. When the detonated at 1,900 feet above the city center of Hiroshima, the subsequent explosion caused temperatures of 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit to annihilate nearly everything within 1,600 feet of blast zone. Almost anything and anyone within a mile was destroyed. And heat were so extreme that they bleached the city's exposed surfaces, except in places where an unsuspecting person shielded the building or sidewalk or bridge from the blast with their own body in their final moments alive. Now, this is what the eye of an victim plagued by an atomic rack looks like. While it had been a well-known fact that radiation causes cataracts in animals, the development of atomic cataracts in human beings was noted after the atomic in Japan. Now, it wasn't just this person who suffered from this, but many others as well. Number 5. The Babushka Lady. The woman in the brown coat, or the Babushka Lady as she was later called by the FBI, was very close to JFK when he was assassinated in Dallas. Traveling in a presidential motorcade through downtown Dallas, JFK was assassinated, hit once in the back and once in the head. Kennedy was taken to Parkland Hospital for emergency medical treatment, where he was pronounced dead 30 minutes later. Now, Lee Harvey Oswald was charged with Kennedy's assassination. He denied. Oswald then was as well soon after. These theories allege the involvement of the CIA, the Mafia, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, Cuban Prime Minister Fidel Castro, the KGB, or some combination. Now, according to eyewitnesses though, this woman, the Babushka Lady, filmed the entire thing. It's thought that from her vantage point, she may have been able to answer some critical questions about what really happened that day. However, the FBI was never able to track her down, and no one has since been able to figure out the identity of this mystery observer. Number 4. Human zoos. Yes, you might have thought that zoos were strictly for animals, but once upon a time there were human zoos, which I personally find disgusting. Now, this photo was taken in 1904, where the US government imported 1,300 indigenous Filipinos from different tribes to display at the St. Louis Exposition in 1904. Yeah, you heard that right. The government did this, but are we really that surprised? The zoos were public displays of people, usually in so-called natural or primitive state, to be seen and gawked at. These zoos were most prominent during the 19th and 20th centuries, and in the 1870s, exhibitions of so-called exotic populations became popular throughout the Western world. Human zoos could be seen in many of Europe's largest cities, such as Paris, Hamburg, London, Milan, as well as American cities such as New York City and Chicago. These people were zoo attractions among the monkeys and lizards to show off the new US possessions. These people were often bound by ropes and visitors threw peanuts at them. The treatment of these human beings was just awful. Number 3. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. The Dyatlov Pass incident was an event in which 9 Soviet hikers died in the northern Ural Mountains between February 1st and 2nd, 1959, under uncertain circumstances. This creepy photo shows the determined group traversing the harsh terrain just before they met their fate on the night of February 1st. The experienced trekking group from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, led by Igor Dyatlov, had established a camp in the Russian SFSR of the Soviet Union. Now, overnight, something caused them to cut their way out of their tent and flee the campsite while inadequately dressed for the heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures. Now, after the group's bodies were discovered, an investigation by Soviet authorities determined that 6 of them had died from hypothermia, while the other 3 had died by physical trauma. One victim had major skull damage, 2 had severe chest trauma, and another had a small crack in his skull. 4 of the bodies were found lying in running water in a creek, and 3 of those 4 had damaged soft tissue of the head and face. 2 of the bodies had missing eyes, 1 had a missing tongue, and 1 had missing eyebrows. Number 2. Treatment of a patient with mental illness. This 1890 photo depicts a woman forced into a crucifixion pose and facing a wall. The woman is a patient at a mental institution undergoing treatment. Now, believe it or not, forced standing was considered a legitimate part of treatment for mental illness in 19th century Germany. Now, back in the 18th and early 20th century, women were sometimes institutionalized due to their opinions and their inability to be controlled properly by a primarily male-dominated culture. There were financial incentives too, because before the passage of the Married Women's Property Act 1882, all of a wife's assets passed automatically to her husband. The men who were in charge of these women women, either a husband, father, or brother, could send these women to mental institutions, stating they believed that these women were mentally ill because of their strong opinions. These men had the last say when it came to the mental health of these women, so if they believed that these women were mentally ill, or if they simply wanted to silence the voices and opinions of these women, they could easily send them to mental institutions. This is what could have happened to this woman in that photograph. Now, besides standing, practices at these asylums were dark, as they had treatments that included restraints, isolation, electroshock therapy, ice baths, forced drugging, and even lobotomies. And coming in at number 1 is mustard gas tested on American military. Mustard gas is a type of chemical warfare agent, and as a chemical weapon, mustard gas was first used in World War I. In 1943, the US Navy exposed its own sailors to mustard gas. Now, officially, the Navy was testing the effectiveness of new clothing and gas masks against the deadly gas that had proven so terrifying in the First World War. Young men were approached after 8 weeks of boot camp and asked if they wanted to participate in an experiment that would help shorten the war. Obviously, they said yes, but they didn't know what they were signing up for. Only when the boys reached the research laboratory were they told the experiment involved mustard gas. Now, the participants, almost all of whom suffered several external and internal burns, were ignored by the Navy and in some cases were threatened with the Espionage Act. In 1991, the reports were finally declassified and taken before Congress.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have The Fire. This is a photo that comes to us from 2003 at the Station nightclub in Rhode Island, and it shows the band Great White as they perform. While this seems like just a regular photo that someone took on their Motorola Razr, what ensued shortly after this photo was taken is absolutely tragic. Basically, as the band performed, there were some pyrotechnics that were set off, and while this was meant to be a spectacular display, it only ended up in disaster. The fireworks ended up setting all of the flammable acoustic foam in the walls and ceiling on fire, and within 1 minute, everything that was combustible was up in flames. Within 2 minutes, the entire club was fully engulfed in black smoke, and people were having trouble finding exits. In the end, this fire took the lives of 100 people, and another 230 were injured as a result. It has gone down in US history as one of the worst and most deadly nightclub fires. In our number 9 spot today, we have The Core. This photo shows a physicist named Harold Agnew, and while this looks like a relatively normal, non-threatening photo, what he has in his hand is truly devastating. Harold is holding the nuclear core of what was nicknamed the Fat Man atomic bomb. This means that Harold is holding the nuclear core of the atomic bomb that was later dropped on Nagasaki in 1945. The immediate blast, of course, took many lives, but so did the long-term effects of the bomb, like radiation illnesses and that sort of thing. It's crazy to look at a photo like this because it seems so perfectly normal when he literally has a life-changing, world-ending device in the palm of his hand. Also, I don't think I could ever hold something like that. Not only would I just not want to, but I don't think I could even get near it for fear of something going wrong. In our number 8 spot today, we have The Eruption. This is a photo that is showing Mount Pinatubo, which is located in the Philippines, on June 15th, 1991. That is the day that this volcano erupted into what would be the second largest volcanic eruption of the 20th century. Certainly impressive, also extremely terrifying. This photo shows the pyroclastic flow full of hot gas and rock being flung into the air. Eruptive activity in the volcano first started on April 2nd of that year, which prompted researchers to set up seismographs in the area. By June, the volcano was having a group of progressively shallower eruptions before, on June 12th, the volcano had its first spectacular eruption, which sent an ash column 19 kilometers up into the atmosphere. Additional smaller explosions continued on June 13th, which then led to some intense seismic activity. After more highly gas-charged magma reached the surface, on June 15th, the volcano once again exploded, this time sending the cloud of ash 40 kilometers up into the atmosphere. Volcanic ash and pumice blanketed the surrounding areas, and pyroclastic flows filled what were once deep valleys with fresh volcanic deposits. It is truly magnificent and extremely powerful, and this photo shows just that. In our number 7 spot today, we have Post-War. This is a photo that is said to have been taken in 1946, just after the end of the Second World War. Story goes that the person person in this photo is a soldier who had just returned home from war, which would already be difficult and challenging enough, but as he returned home, he came to hear the news that unfortunately, despite his survival, his family had lost their lives during the war. There is no doubt about the impact that either world war had on the world, and how the impact doesn't stop once the war is over. These wars changed the course of history, and they changed people's lives forever. This is definitely a difficult photo to look at, and it's an eerie reminder of those dark times.
Number 6, nuclear site list. Alright, back to the dark stuff. Here on Most Amazing, we love lists, right? I'm not sure if you can tell. Smash that thumbs up, hit subscribe, yada yada, we love it. But apparently the US government also fancies a list or two. Who thought? Back when Obama was still running the show, a report was delivered to Congress, or rather it was supposed to be. The 266-page report featuring, every nook and cranny about the US nuclear program. It was released publicly on the government printing office's website in draft form. Draft form, couldn't have been easier, just a casual PDF that shows us maps with stockpiled fuel used for nuclear warheads. Awesome, right next to your resume. Imagine that, so convenient. How does this even happen? I thought this type of stuff could never happen, right? Well, MIT professor John M. Deutsch said that these screw-ups do of course happen, and it's normal, and this one here isn't a serious breach. I mean, it certainly sounds serious, but okay. We'll just have to trust the government. Number 5, UFOs in the ocean. This video here was leaked in the last couple of years. You've probably seen it, hopefully not. This would be a great day. The footage itself was recorded in 2019 in San Diego. Now the Pentagon has since of course confirmed its authenticity, and the UAP, the unidentified aerial phenomenon here, is sphere-shaped and it's flying at extremely high speeds. There's no exhaust, no propulsion system whatsoever. It's just a metal ball whipping by San Diego, and now we're questioning our beliefs, so that's fun. The sphere vanished into the water afterwards, into the ocean, and then was never seen ever again. Number 4, radar footage. Now normally when we see leaked footage, be it of UAPs or leaked documents, whatever, it's always the worst quality. Like that one, not the best, right? Not quite 4K. It's hard to believe when military footage is poor quality, right? Like how can we see photos of black holes and not even have a photo of a UAP yet, right? What's going on here? Well, Jeremy Corbell, he's here to help. Jeremy? What if he just walked in? That would be crazy. He's not here. That's insane. Jeremy took to Twitter in May 2021 sharing footage of US Navy ships being swarmed by UFOs. Like more than one. Sorry, UAPs. We're not gonna call them that anymore. Now this time we have radar footage, and that's pretty sweet. That's different. It came from the Combat Information Center aboard the USS Omaha. The 46-second clip was originally recorded July 15th, 2019. You can even hear people in the background reacting to what's happening in real time. You hear panic in their voices. These military personnel in the background, you can overhear them talking about how fast the objects are moving on the radar. So, seems very believable this time, right? It's not just a grainy footage. It's like a live reaction kind of. And if he's spooked, we're spooked, right? Number 3, Watergate. I have to include Watergate, right? It's one of the biggest scandals in US history. Right in the middle of 1972, there were 5 men who were all arrested for breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. It was clear that they intended on bugging the place, right? It was fishy, it was obvious, they looked like spy kids, right? They were up to no good. Now as the year went on, the election came closer and closer, and all of a sudden out of the woodwork comes this anonymous source who fed information to Washington Post that the Watergate bugging incident was a massive campaign of political spying and sabotage kicked off by none other than President Nixon himself. It was kicked off by his re-election and directed by officials of the White House. It was a whole planned thing. Now despite this information leak and it being reported to the news, Nixon was still re-elected. Now these men were clearly linked to a fundraising group for Nixon, but his administration just kept denying any involvement, right? That's the key. Deny, deny, deny. It wasn't until later that year in 1972 when reporters Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, they came forward and exposed everything. Now we got the truth. They exposed the administrator's role in the entire scandal, how they had an inside source, an FBI agent named Mark Felt. It was a whole thing. This ultimately led to Nixon resigning in 1974, the first ever president to do so. Yeah, that's how you know you got caught, when you have to resign. Know what I mean? Number 2, shadow brokers. Back in August 2016, a group named the Shadow Brokers were the talk of the town. And with that name, how can you not be, right? The shadow brokers would steal cyber weapons from an NSA hacking unit and then proceed to sell them online to the highest bidder. Now this sounds made up, this sounds like it's from a movie, this is crazy, right? Now these tools in question, these cyber weapons, they've been used by many countries and many not so great sounding schemes. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, you name it, these cyber attacks can happen anywhere, right? The 2019 ransomware cyber attack, that's one example. This incident was connected to the shadow brokers. So whoever this mysterious group is, it still remains a mystery and still sounds made up as shit. It sounds like a DC Comics villain. It's insane. And finally, number 1, motorized roller skates. We'll end on a fun one, cause you know, why not? This last one they've been working on for a very long time and we still can't crack it, right? This is the craziest thing I've ever seen working on this channel, so I gotta end with it. Motorized roller skates, what a nightmare this would be. Imagine if this worked out. Even Elon Musk would see this and be like, no, that's crazy. This photo was taken at the Sunoco station in Hartford, Connecticut. Now, context aside, this is an odd one. A guy with a briefcase is filling up at the gas station and he's wearing roller skates. That would look bad today. You would have SWAT teams rolling up if you saw that, right? It's 1956 and that futuristic looking man right there is Mike Dreschler. Now, at the time, he was working for a Detroit skate company, but he was very close to gas-powered skates. They would have cost around $250, which today is around $2,400. And its max speed was 17 miles an hour. Again, imagine that in the closing act of like a Mission Impossible movie. That's crazy. Now obviously the public wasn't supposed to see this. They feared that it would encourage folks to get creative on their own and, you know, launch their way to work. So yeah, don't make rocket skates with gasoline. Thanks.
So the first photo we're taking a look at is this one here. On February 3rd of 1959, musicians J.P. Richardson, also known as the Big Bopper, Richie Valens, and Buddy Holly tragically died in a plane crash near Clear Lake, Iowa, and what is famously known as the day the music died. This is the last photo taken of the three before boarding their final flight. The musicians had been traveling on a small Beechcraft Bonanza airplane, chartered after their tour bus broke down. The plane, piloted by Roger Peterson, took off from the Mason City Municipal Airport en route to Hector Airport in Fargo, North Dakota. The weather conditions on the night of the crash were poor, with a combination of snow, sleet, and fog, and despite these conditions, the flight took off anyway, and the plane crashed only a few minutes after takeoff, around 1 a.m., into a cornfield near Clear Lake. There were no survivors. If you like videos just like this, creepy paranormal stuff, cryptid stuff, ghost stuff, we got it all, so hit that subscribe button and don't miss out. Next on the list is the 1943 glider crash. This is the last photograph taken of William D. Becker, the former mayor of St. Louis, along with several other prominent men in the community, right after boarding a brand new Waco CG-4 glider, manufactured by William B. Robertson, also pictured here. This was going to be the first public demonstration of the aircraft taking flight. Spectators watched from Lampert St. Louis Airport as the men boarded the glider, and what they didn't know was that they were witnessing the last moments of these men's lives. The glider was taxied by a plane to a runway for takeoff. They took flight, and once ready to allow the glider to glide, the towing cable was released. Almost immediately after the glider was released, though, something terrifying happened. Its right wing completely snapped off. Now, a wing snapping off of an aircraft spells disaster no matter what type of aircraft it is, but keep in mind these gliders were engineless, created specifically for the war efforts to be released like this and then glide down, usually into enemy lines. So now completely on its own and missing a wing, there was no way for it to make a safe landing. It just plummeted towards the earth, crashing into the ground. All 10 men aboard died on impact. Next up, we have the death of Robert Overacker. Robert Overacker was a daredevil from Camarillo, California. At 12:35 p.m. October 1st, he attempted to go over Niagara Falls on a jet ski with the intention of raising awareness about the homeless. And during his attempt, Overacker wore a life jacket and was carrying a flag promoting a charity for the homeless. He had also intended to deploy a parachute at the last moment to escape the fall, but the parachute didn't deploy and he plunged over the falls. This photo was taken just as he went over. He was only 39 years old. Number 7, George Mallory and Sandy Irvine. On June 8th, 1924, British mountaineers George Mallory and Andrew Sandy Irvine went missing on Mount Everest during their attempt to reach the summit. Mallory and Irvine were part of the British British 1924 Mount Everest expedition led by General Charles Bruce. The pair were last seen by their fellow climber Noel Odell at an elevation of around 28,000 feet on the northeast ridge of the mountain. The weather on Everest that day was unstable, very overcast with snow making for low visibility. After Mallory and Irvine failed to return to their camp, search parties were sent out, but no trace of them was found. Several expeditions in the following years attempted to locate Mallory and Irvine's remains and their camera, hoping to find clues about whether they reached the summit, but it wasn't until 1999 that Mallory's body was discovered on the north face of the mountain. The last photo snapped of them was taken by Noel Odell right before they began their ascent.
In our number 6 spot today, we have the Defies. Speaking of the Second World War, as it began to come to a close, many of the Germans who were involved in all of the many violations of human rights began to flee or try and hide or disguise themselves for fear of being persecuted. One of those was, of course, the worst of them all, Hitler himself. This photo, or rather series of photos, was created by the US government as an attempt to document the many ways that he could have disguised himself in order to escape being recognized and captured. At the time, the fear of him being able to escape responsibility and go on living his life abroad was very real. I mean, there have been others who actually did manage to do just that, and that is exactly the reason for these photos. There's also something kind of interesting and bizarre about what happens when we take away the features of his that we know him by. In the end, he didn't escape and go on to live abroad, but he did escape being held responsible before the world. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Titanic. We all know the story of the Titanic. I mean, it's one of the most famous in history, and this photo comes from just before the historic iceberg encounter. On April 10th, 1912, the Titanic set sail on its maiden voyage, heading from Southampton over to New York City. The ship took a couple of stops along the way, one in France, one in Ireland, before setting off for the United States officially, and somewhere along the beginning part of its journey, someone was able to snap a photo of the ship as it sailed. It's not clear exactly where this photo was taken, but it is thought to be the last photo taken of the ship before its tragic end. Considering it was only 4 days after the ship set sail that it hit the iceberg, it is likely that this photo came not too long before the terrible day. In our number 4 spot today, we have the lipstick killer. This is a photo that comes to us from December 10th, 1945. If looking at this image gives you a shudder down your spine, that absolutely makes sense, as it was written by a terrible person known as the lipstick killer. This photo is an image of a note he left written on the wall at one of his crime scenes. The photo comes from the apartment of Frances Brown, as just before he wrote this message, he took her life. After this message was left, he ended up taking the life of one other person because he was finally caught by the police 6 months later. The message scrawled in the photo reads, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more, I cannot control myself." It is an absolutely chilling note with a horrific backstory. In our number 3 spot today, we have bad politics. This is a photo that shows the former First Lady Rosalind Carter, and you may or may not be wondering who that man next to her is, and to that I say, my friends, that is the horrible monster that is John Wayne Gacy, aka the Killer Clown. This photo was taken at a Polish Constitution Day celebration in Chicago in 1978, which is the same year that Gacy was arrested for his crimes, so at the point this photo was taken, he had already taken the lives of at least 20 people. The reason he was there and was able to meet the First Lady is because he was not only the worst of the worst, he also somehow became the Democratic precinct captain in the Chicago suburbs in the 1970s, and he was the marshal of the Polish parade. The picture is even signed, quote, "To John Gacy, best wishes, Rosalind Carter." It's terrible. I hate it so much. I feel very bad for anyone who had to meet him. In our number 2 spot today, we have the first day. This is a photo that shows Dorothy Count Scoggins as she joined her new school. What should be a perfectly normal activity was certainly anything but for Dorothy, as she was the first black person to attend Harding High School in Charlotte, North Carolina, which was previously an all-white school. After the passing of the Purcell Plan in 1956, there were 40 students who applied for transfers, and Dorothy was one of 4 who was accepted. This photo clearly shows that although small steps were being taken within the law to prevent segregation, there were no steps being taken within the students. As Dorothy just tries to get an education, you can see her peers clearly trying to disturb her peace. After 4 days of this kind of treatment, Dorothy's parents ended up withdrawing her from the school over fears for her safety. These images, however, were seen around the world. This photo acts as quite the reminder for where we were really not all that long ago. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Challenger crew. This is a photo that was taken second of the clearly very excited Challenger crew as they walked down the ramp ready to head off on their mission. The crew even included 37-year-old Krista McAuliffe, who was a high school social studies teacher. She had won a spot on this mission through a program with NASA called the Teacher in Space program, and she had trained diligently for months in order to be the first non-military person in space. On January 28, 1986, the Challenger mission proved to be fateful just 73 seconds after liftoff. 2 rubber O-rings failed because of the cold temperatures of the morning, and on live television the world watched as the spacecraft broke apart and plunged into the ocean, sadly taking the lives of everyone on board. It is an absolutely tragic event made even more chilling by this final photo.
At number 10, parkour gone wrong. I'm sure you've all seen an example of parkour before, but I would personally describe it as people launching themselves from one spot to the next, avoiding injury by the skin of their teeth. Often done outdoors, some of the maneuvers these people do are seemingly impossible. While it takes a lot of practice and coordination, this sport can also be super dangerous. Parkour daredevils like to take things quite literally to the next level, and as heights get higher and tricks get more technical, disaster is not far behind. Pavel Kashin was a Russian parkour artist who unfortunately learned his lesson the hard way. In 2013, he was performing a stunt on the rooftop of a 16-story building with a friend filming. They ended up capturing the final moments of Kashin's life. He was one of the well-known parkour artists or freerunners, being named one of the best in the world. He was known for his breakthrough stunts, which you can still find videos of today. On the day of his passing, Kashin was standing on a 3-foot wide ledge on the top of an apartment building. The daredevil decided to do a backflip on this very small ledge, with him completing the trick only to lose his footing on the landing and be sent over the edge. Kashin's fans and fellow members of the parkour community showed their support and sent respects to his family. His friends uploaded the final image of Pavel mid-flip with the permission of his parents to the web. Kashin's parents hoped that the image would deter others from doing the same as their son. Number 9. Wind turbine fire. If you've ever seen a wind turbine in real life before, you will know just how massive the energy converting monsters actually are. In October 2013, 2 workers were doing routine maintenance to a 67-meter high turbine in Unthinkable, Netherlands. Don't come for me, I know I butchered that name, but while they were doing this maintenance, a fire broke out, quickly engulfing the only escape route, trapping the workers high above the ground. Due to the height of the fire, the firefighters had a hard time reaching the fire to put it out, so a specialized crew of firefighters were called in with a large crane. Unfortunately, this took hours, which the technicians did not have. In their last moments, a photo of the tragedy was snapped, and in it you can see the turbine in a blaze, but you can also see the 2 workers embracing in their final moments. The image just amplifies how big the turbine actually is and shows how hopeless a rescue mission would have been. The men were just 19 and 21 at the time. One tried one last effort to survive, with one man jumping from the wind turbine in the last effort to save himself, and the other tried to scale down the side only to be caught up in the blaze. The man who jumped was found in a field next to the turbine, and the other was found when firefighters were able to finally climb to the turbine. The cause of the fire is unknown, but believed to be a short circuit. While this freak accident ended up taking 2 lives, the tragedy led to a political inquiry into safety precautions for wind turbine maintenance crews. Their final photo together was sad, but it was nice that in their final moments they did have each other. Number 8. Racing to disaster. Gary Box was one of the many firefighters who was there on 9/11, risking it all in order to save lives. Unfortunately, he was also one of the many who never made it home after that day. Hours before heroically losing his life, Box was photographed racing towards the disaster. The image was taken in the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel by a pedestrian in their car. Their engine got stuck in the traffic of the tunnel, so in full gear, carrying as much as they could, Box and the rest of his crew started running on foot to ground zero. Gary was 35 at the time, and his remains were never recovered. All images taken that day I'm sure have something haunting about them, but knowing how little time he had left is another level. At number 7. Ronaldo Dagsa. He was a Filipino politician, a member of the Peacekeeping Action Team, and a corporal in the Philippine Army Reserve Command. Now, this photo is not of Dagsa before he passed, but due to how haunting it is, I still had to include it. His passing achieved notoriety due to the picture he snapped of his family on New Year's with unbelievable timing. The image Dagsa captured also inadvertently captured the man who was about to take the shot that would ultimately take his life. The photo was extremely helpful when it came to investigators identifying the shooter, because the image shows the gunman quite literally seconds before taking the fatal shot. The picture was taken outside the councilman's house in metropolitan Manila. The photo led to a quick arrest of the shooter as well as his accomplice. Apparently the suspects were known car thieves out on bail, likely holding a grudge against Degsa, who had the men arrested a year earlier. It is extremely sad that Degsa unknowingly captured his own final moments, especially with his family being right there, but at least they were able to use it to catch the gunman.
Japan Airlines Flight 123, a Boeing 747, crashed on August 12th of 1985, taking the lives of 520 of the 524 people on board. The crash was caused by severe structural failure, which led to a rapid decompression and loss of control. The last photo recovered from the crash site was taken by one of the passengers on the flight. In the photo, passengers can be seen wearing oxygen masks. The accident was caused by the rupture of the aircraft's rear pressure bulkhead, which separated the pressurized cabin from the unpressurized tail section. The bulkhead had been improperly repaired after a tail strike incident 7 years earlier. The failure of the rear pressure bulkhead led to a sudden and explosive decompression inside the cabin. Decompression caused damage to control cables and systems, making it almost impossible for the pilots to maintain control of the plane. The craft eventually entered a rapid descent and crashed into a mountain range. There were actually more than 4 passengers who survived the initial crash, but they died after several hours waiting to be rescued. Japan Airlines Flight 123 crash is one of the deadliest single aircraft accidents in aviation history. Number 5, Snake Man. This is the last photo taken of Ali Khan Samsudin. He was known as the Snake King after he spent 12 hours a day for 40 days living with 400 cobras in a small room. He also stayed in a small glass enclosure with 6,000 scorpions for 21 days, earning him the title Scorpion King. His 2006 performance in Kuala Lumpur would sadly be his last, though. During his show, he was bitten by a king cobra, one of the deadliest snakes in the world, with venom powerful enough to take down a full-sized elephant in a matter of hours. Samsudin had been bitten before. He'd even suffered a couple cobra bites before and made it out alive, but this time he didn't recover. His condition just got worse and worse, and the Snake King died in the hospital 3 days later. Next, we have the last photo of Mayinga Naseka. Mayinga Naseka was a nurse in Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, during the 1976 Ebola outbreak. She contracted the Ebola virus while treating patients at Mambalad Hospital in Kinshasa. She caught the virus while treating a nun who had been flown in from Yambuku Mission Hospital, where the initial outbreak began. Nasaka's case became widely known as she was one of the earliest identified healthcare workers to be infected during the outbreak. And in this photo, you see her standing with another nurse tending to a patient. She died just a few days after this picture was taken. The nurses weren't given the proper protective equipment, and there hadn't been any proper precautions taken to prevent contact with the nun's blood or fluids, because at the time, it wasn't known just how deadly the virus really was. Next up, we have the 1961 US figure skating team. This is the last photo of the US figure skating team, which was taken at the airport shortly before they boarded Sabina Flight 548. In the photo, team members appeared in high spirits, smiling, posing for the camera. Little did they know that this would be the last moment captured before the tragic event that claimed their lives. On February 15th of 1961, Sabina Flight 548, a Boeing 707 aircraft crashed while attempting to land at Brussels Airport in Belgium. The plane was carrying the entire team along with coaches, officials, and other passengers. The crash resulted in the tragic loss of 72 people on board. The cause of the crash never been 100% determined, but the most likely cause was a failure in the plane's flap system combined with poor weather conditions. The pilot struggled to maintain control during the landing attempt, leading to the deadly accident. Alright, next up we have the last photo of Christopher McCandless. On September 6th, 1992, the decomposing body of Christopher McCandless was found in a bus he had been living in just outside of Denali National Park in Alaska. McCandless had embarked on a journey to leave civilization behind and live off the grid. He spent 113 days living off the land, using the bus as his shelter. His journal entries were discovered, and it was likely he died about 19 days before his body was discovered. After After living in the bus for over 3 months, McCandless finally decided he was going to try and make his way back to civilization. But this was unfortunately not going to be as easy as he thought. The river he had crossed to reach the bus was now much higher and swifter than it was when he first ventured in. He decided to turn back, left an SOS note on the bus reading, "Attention possible visitors, SOS, I need your help. I'm injured, near death, and too weak to hike out. I'm all alone. This is no joke. In the name of God, please remain to save me. I'm collecting berries close by and shall return this evening. Thank you, Chris McCandless." McCandless succumbed to starvation while waiting for help that never arrived. When his body was discovered, he appeared extremely gaunt, reportedly weighing only around 60 pounds at the time of his death. And finally, we have Princess Diana. This photo was taken by paparazzi in August of 1997 in Paris. Pictured here is Princess Diana, Dottie Fade, her driver Henry Paul, and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones, right before a fatal car accident. Rees-Jones was the only survivor. Princess Diana and Dottie Fade were in a romantic relationship. They had been vacationing together in the French Riviera when they were pursued by paparazzi. As they left the Ritz Hotel in Paris, their car was chased by paparazzi photographers on motorcycles trying to capture images of the couple. In the Pont d'Alma tunnel, the car lost control and slammed into a concrete pillar. The impact of the crash was severe, leading to the deaths of Princess Diana and the other two in the car. Of course, the bodyguard did survive though. The aggressive pursuit by the paparazzi was widely criticized. Some people blamed them for indirectly causing the accident due to their relentless chase, something that I definitely agree with. I hate paparazzi. Like, just come on, get a real job, honestly.
Kicking off the list at number 10, the Hook Island sea monster. Ah yes, another reason to avoid the ocean, as if our channel wasn't that already. This photo was taken back in 1964. This photo apparently is a sea monster off the coast of Hook Island. This thing is roughly 90 feet in length, so it's pretty noticeable, especially in shallow waters. A man named Robert LeSerac spotted it while he was with his family. He noticed its tail was injured, but its head was massive. Those are the two noticeable features. Injured tail and a big old head. It looked like a giant tadpole, but many believe it's a giant tarp, but there's not enough evidence either way. What do you guys think? Is it some sort of mythological creature, or maybe a now extinct species of fish, or just an optical illusion? Maybe just a shadow, or a big rock. It could be a rock. Either way, avoid those shallow areas. Stingrays alone? No, no way. Catch me in a lake. Number 9, the skunk ape. This one is exactly what it sounds like. How fun. The skunk ape was seen back in 2000, so hopefully, if it was a real thing, it's long gone by now. Or it's since reproduced and we're screwed. 2 photos were taken of this skunk ape creature. This thing looks like Bigfoot's cooler, older cousin. You know, the cousin who has a lava lamp and does kickflips in the garage in October? That's the skunk ape, compared to Bigfoot. Bigfoot's old news, get him out of here. What does he do anyways besides... Guy's boring. Doesn't do any kickflips. This guy for sure. This guy haunts families, it seems. An anonymous source sent the Sarasota County Sheriff's Department these photos. They mailed them, which for starters, how jarring would that be to open 9 a.m. in the morning? But she claims these photos were taken in her backyard and that this creature was not a black bear. I don't think that's a black bear. If anything, it's a really, really large dog. Those teeth alone are a red flag either way. Closing that door. Good night. Number 8, Phoenix Lights. Turning the calendars back to 1997, a time long before Photoshop. This photo here shows a series of unidentified aerial phenomena. It's just hovering over Phoenix, Arizona. They were bright and they stuck around for a few hours. This was also only 1 year after the movie Independence Day came out, so I'm sure this freaked a lot of residents out. Or maybe it's fake because of the movie. Who knows? That's why I'm here. There's many eyewitness reports of the Phoenix Lights, so much so that an explanation was demanded. So the US Air Force came forward and said the lights were flares dropping during a training exercise. Yeah, just a casual training night exercise over the city of Phoenix, Arizona. Classic, we always see those. This obviously worried people and the Air Force took responsibility, yet later on in 2007 and 2008, the same lights returned over the city. The same lights returned in the same spot. Still, there has been no explanation that makes any sense. Drones? Maybe? Was it too soon? I don't know. Drones are good. Drones are too good now. That bowling alley video of the drone whipping through, way too good. So, you never know. Number 7, Battle of Los Angeles. Of course, we have to mention one of the most unspeakable battles of all time on this list. The Battle of LA, otherwise known as the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, happened during World War II. It happened right at the end of February 1942. This event, first of all, took place only a few months after the Pearl Harbor attack, so everybody was obviously a little stressed out at this point. Something like 25 enemy aircraft was spotted flying over LA in the late hours of February 24th, so air raids went off. Blackouts were now in effect. This was not a drill. Or was it? At this point, it didn't look like a drill. Artillery fire, machine guns, anti-aircraft shells were all going off. It was loud, it was bright, and in total around 1,400 shells were fired off. 2 people had heart attacks as this unfolded. 5 people died in total from this retaliation, and it was all a false alarm. Apparently. A press conference was held by the Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox, and he called the incident war nerves. Just some nerves, just some whoops, thought I heard something, false alarm. This is insane. Do we think something was actually there? Is this photo a photo of a false alarm? You be the judge. That's why I'm here.
Number 6. Discount flight. Keith Sapsford was from Randwick, New South Wales. He passed away just 14 years old with his final moments caught on camera. On February 22nd, 1970, the teen snuck onto the tarmac at Sydney Airport in Australia with the idea to hide inside a Tokyo-bound plane in order to run away. Unfortunately, Sapsford would never make it to Tokyo. His father described Keith as a curious kid who always had an urge to keep on the move. Due to his restlessness, his parents decided to send him to Boys Town, a Roman Catholic institution specializing in troubled children, for some discipline and structure. Instead, Sapsford escaped from the facility after a couple weeks and headed to the airport. Thanks to the far more relaxed regulations and security of the 70s, Sapsford was able to sneak onto the tarmac with ease. It's unknown if Keith knew where the plane was headed, but he saw a plane preparing for boarding and climbed into its wheel well. It took a few hours for the plane to take off, but eventually it made its way to the sky. What Keith didn't know was that the plane was going to reopen the wheel compartments to retract the wheels. When this happened, Sapsford fell out of the plane, falling 200 feet. One of the craziest things about this tragic event was by pure coincidence. Photographer John Gilpin was simply taking pictures at the airport when he unknowingly snapped a pic at the exact same time Sapsford was falling from the plane. I bet when he developed that roll of film, he was totally surprised. His father later said, "All my son wanted to do was see the world. He had itchy feet, and his determination to see how the rest of the world lives cost him his life." Obviously, what happened to Keith was a tragedy, but the photo captured by Gilpin is remarkable as well as haunting. At number 5, Fatal Friend. Brittany Gargle and Cheyenne Antoine were the best of friends until they weren't. Apparently, Brittany was extremely hardworking. At 16, she was juggling school and 2 jobs. Antoine had a rough upbringing with her parents falling into substance use. Cheyenne grew up in foster care. At 15, Antoine's mother passed away, and to cope with the news, she got involved with some dangerous company, also falling into substance use. That's when the 2 girls met, and Brittany helped Cheyenne manage her feelings, and the 2 became close. On March 25th, 2015, Brittany posted a picture of her and Cheyenne on social media. The 2 planned to go out for drinks and have fun, but as the night went on, things got out of hand and the details became fuzzy. The girls traveled to a pub, then to a house party, and then one more pub. Cheyenne claimed that around 4 a.m., Brittany asked a man for a lighter and invited him for drinks, but she didn't know what happened later. Cheyenne heard nothing from Brittany the next day, and later the police received a 911 call of a woman lying on her back, cold to the touch. The woman was identified as Brittany. Cheyenne was questioned and her story checked out, but the police thought she was hiding something. As the police dug further, more details came out. In the end, Brittany's passing was ruled a strangling, and this led them to a crucial lead. It was the picture Cheyenne had posted on social media the night of the events. In it, Cheyenne was wearing a stylish black belt, the same belt that had been found at the crime scene. In 2017, after all the evidence collected, Cheyenne was arrested for taking Brittany's life, with Cheyenne claiming not to remember anything due to the substances. In the end, Cheyenne was sentenced to 7 years in prison, with her release in 2024. At number 4, The Final Dive. Nicholas Mivoli was an American free diver who passed doing what he loved, but not before taking a picture that will give you the chills. Mivoli began freediving competitively in 2012, winning titles twice at the Deja Blue competition and finishing 3rd at the Caribbean Cup in Honduras. With much success in his newfound passion, Mivoli only wanted to take things even further. On November 15, 2013, he prepared to dive into Dean's Blue Hole, hoping to reach 72 meters on a single inhalation with no fins or supplemental oxygen. Surrounded by 15 other athletes and observers, as well as 5 safety divers, he submerged face first, looking like a human arrow diving into the darkness that would ultimately end up being his last dive. Mike Board, freediving record holder, said diving into a depth with no fins, that's a hard physical dive. I was thinking, okay, he's going to have a hard time getting up. Yet, after a dive of 3 minutes and 38 seconds, Mavoli shot back up to the surface. Unfortunately, instead of celebrating the dive, things quickly turned into a nightmare. Mavoli ripped off his goggles, flashed the OK sign, and attempted to complete surface protocol that would make the attempt official by saying, "I am okay." But he wasn't. His words came out jumbled and his eyes were wide and blank. This moment was captured on camera, and the blank fear in the diver's eyes is frightening. He lost consciousness and never regained it after suffering a pulmonary edema. Number 3. Dyatlov Pass Mystery. The Dyatlov Pass incident was the event in which 9 Soviet trekkers passed away in the northern Ural Mountains between February 1st and 2nd, 1959 in uncertain circumstances. There are many theories as to what caused the tragedy, but ultimately it's a mystery. The experienced trekking group from the Yuri Polytechnic Institute was led by Igor Dyatlov. Overnight, something seemingly caused the group to cut their way out of their tent from inside and flee the campsite. While them cutting open their tent from the inside is confusing enough, the bodies found were improperly dressed for the heavy snowfall and the freezing temperatures. As the story goes on, things only get further from making sense. After the bodies were discovered, Soviet authorities determined that 6 had passed from hypothermia, while the other 3 suffered physical trauma. 1 had major skull damage, 2 severe chest trauma, and another had a small skull fracture. 4 of the bodies were found lying in a creek, and 3 of those bodies had soft tissue damage to the head and face. 2 bodies were missing eyes, 1 missing a tongue, and another had missing eyebrows. Now, if it had just been the hypothermia, this case would be totally different, but what the heck did all this physical damage in the middle of nowhere? While we aren't sure exactly what went down, there are lots of pictures of the group's final days as well as plenty of theories. There was a new investigation opened in 2019 calling it an avalanche, but I don't know still. Does an avalanche really remove your tongue and eyeballs? Number 2. Miracle of the Andes. On October 13th, 1972, Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, chartered by an amateur rugby team, crashed into the Andes Mountains. The wreckage of the crash was not located for more than 2 months. There were only 16 out of 45 who survived the whole thing, with the incident gaining international attention after it was revealed the survivors had resorted to cannibalism. Due to the bad weather, the pilot of the plane misjudged their location, and the plane ended up striking a mountain, losing both wings before crashing into a remote valley of Argentina, near the Chilean border. A search party was sent out, but due to the white plane on the white snow, it was unable to be spotted from above. After 8 days, the search was called off, thinking there were no survivors, though later rescue efforts were taken over by family. There were initially 33 survivors, but due to the elements, injuries, and an avalanche, the numbers were shrinking. Several survivors surveyed the area for an escape route. On December 12th, almost exactly 2 months since the crash, 3 men set out to go find help. Though one did return to the crash site after a difficult trek, the other 2 men finally came across some people. It was December 20th now, and the people they found alerted the authorities. On December 22nd, 6 survivors were flown to safety, but bad weather meant the remaining 8 waited until the 23rd. There are photos from both before the crash of the group. On the plane and after of the group surrounding the fallen plane, as well as books and a movie about the incident. And at number 1, solo hike. In 2014, 2 women, Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, were visiting Panama from the Netherlands, and on April 1st they went on a walk through the scenic forest near the Baru volcano, only to never return. Alarm was raised the day after they didn't return from their hike, and a search party was sent out right away, only to find no sign of Kremers or Froon. A while later, a local woman found Froon's backpack. In the bag they found her camera, 2 pairs of sunglasses, some cash, her passport, a water bottle, 2 bras, and both the women's phones. Probably the most concerning they found were the final images taken on the camera. All of the photos from April 1st are just the 2 women exploring the jungle. Then there are no pictures until April 8th, when 90 unsettling pictures were taken with the flash in the middle of the jungle, female, timestamped between 1 and 4 a.m. Most of these images are of complete darkness and the jungle floor, but there are two very alarming pics. One shows some of the women's belongings on a rock, and the other looks like the back of Kremer's head with what appears to be bloodstain in her hair. Something else suspicious about the camera is that image 509 was missing, with 508 being the last of them looking okay, and image 510 being the first in the darkness days later. They found a pelvic bone and a foot still inside a boot. Froon's bones appeared to decompose naturally, but Kremer seemed to be stark white as if they'd been bleached, further leading to question if someone else was involved.